It's still asking me to hit record, so I'll hit record before I start talking, and then we'll be okay.
Okay.
All right. Joe, you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was just watching it. I've got a notice here. I think I just need to reset this. It says try again because the recording error has occurred.
Okay.
I think I'm okay. And Peter, I should introduce myself. I'm Joe Franklin. I work here at NASSP and with Alexa. So I know most of your communication has been with Alexa for the last few days.
Yeah.
But I'm the person who wrote you the initial email inviting you to do the webinar.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the invite. I appreciate it.
So.
And my mic sounds okay. Is it too high, too low? Is it leveled okay?
Just fine.
Okay.
Yeah, it's coming very clear on my end.
Yeah.
Great.
We have about 20 some people registered for the webinar today, Peter. Typically, we find that about half of the people who are registered don't show up for a variety of reasons. I think some of them are registered because they think they have to do that to get the slides and get the recording. But we also think that, well, we know that myself having been a high school and middle school principal, I know that anything can happen, especially toward the end of the school day here on the East Coast. So that's a good reason for people not to show up. And as of right now, that's my email. Could you all hear that when that went off?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'll have to be sure to mute when I'm not talking, I'll mute my mic. I don't know how. I have a new browser and I can't figure out how to turn off the email. So we have about 15 minutes. Let me play with that for a minute and see if I can get it turned off.
Peter, do you do a lot of webinars?
I do. I do a lot of PD in person, but also online. We do our own webinar series with journalists, so I play the moderator role often as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and we have an online PD session. In fact, I have a slide here about it if folks want to register. It's a repeat of a three-part series we did in the fall, just giving teachers an overview of news literacy as a content area with 3 sessions, one overview, one about the misinformation landscape, and one about the connections between news literacy and civic literacy and civic engagement. So if folks want to direct their educators to resources, I think that's a good option for folks who join today.
Peter, when do you think, can you give me some idea of where we'll be when we go to Q&A?
Yeah, we will be, so let's say, no, Alexa and I were talking about that. I will get, and I know you may not believe me, but I will get further than you think.
Okay.
I did this deck at NCSS, or a version of it. Oh, hold on, my PowerPoint is rebooting.
Mm-hmm.
Good that does that now.
Yeah.
So I will get, I think, safely to, and I'll keep an eye on time, and you can chat, 5 minutes to Q&A or something. If you want, I'll see that as well. That's a good way to, but I hope to get to at least to here where we're heading, kind of the future of the misinformation landscape.
Okay.
And if possible, get here to talk about sort of some of the trends on the horizon. At the very least, I think that I can get through the resources here, which are our resources. So at 249, I basically covered everything and talked about our tool. Okay. And then from 250 on is sort of other stuff that's available online that I think are really powerful third-party tools. And I will do my best to get to those. So the way I usually lay out slides is that they iterate. So I'll click through 1, 2, 3, 4 while I'm talking through a single sentence or two. So they really do move fast.
Okay.
And it's, it's good to remind folks that this is recorded. I cover a lot because there's so much to talk about and cover when we're talking about these kinds of things. And I think that kind of makes the case for how complex and fast and furious today's information landscape is.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you're feeling overwhelmed listening to all the examples, that's exactly what people feel when they're sort of looking at their social media feeds and trying to sort out what's going on. So part of that's the, the design of the session. Yeah.
And we have about 10 minutes until we're supposed to start, and I like to start right at the stroke of 3. The other question that I had about, in addition to Q&A, is at the end I usually do a little commercial for the NASSP conference. I don't know if you have that slide attached to the end of yours or not, but if you don't, it doesn't matter. I can simply do an invitation to the conference without the slide up. Okay. Okay.
And I can put that.
Yeah.
I can jump to that. Before is that before Q&A or after Q&A? You want
after
to talk
Q&A.
about that?
After
Okay.
Q&A. And you use GoToWebinar a lot, so you know this. When I hit end webinar, it just cuts everybody off, so it always feels abrupt. But so I'll say thank you now, so because I won't be able to talk to you offline at the end.
Fine. Sure.
And hopefully everything will go well. I had asked, I guess it was Alexa, to check about if I don't have your deck on my computer, will the slides still be attached to the recording? And I can't see any reason they wouldn't be. Alexa, are you on?
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is Joe. My understanding is that wherever you stop is what will be recorded, and that's what will be captured for the. Is that accurate, Peter?
It is, but I will send you. I'll save this as a PDF deck.
Okay.
Okay.
Right now, and then I'll just email that as a PDF that you can just send that whole thing to folks.
Okay.
Okay.
At any point.
Okay, and you have Joe's email address?
I believe so, but
if you
Joe, if you just want to send me a quick email, I'll reply with that attached and copy.
I know you have Alexa's, right? So just send it to Alexa.
Yeah.
Yeah, just send it to Alexa. So she and I are in constant contact.
Sounds good.
Okay, good. I'll be right back.
Okay, I will too. I'm going to grab some water and get ready here.
All right then. Good. So Peter is putting the slides in PDF. He's going to help to you, so we'll have the entire deck. Okay, and is it a PDF? So he was saying that we could post it on the, well, I guess just to have everything and make it.
Peter, I just thought of something else. Oh, I do have questions from you. What concepts and skills do students, how do teachers integrate? So I will use those questions if others don't come in. And we're at the 5-minute mark, so we're starting in about 5 minutes.
Okay. Can I ask, do you all hear audio if I play?
You mean now?
Let me see.
Oh.
Like here?
I'm not hearing anything but you. No,
I'm not hearing anything.
no audio.
No? Okay.
Well,
I might have to turn my speakers up at that point if we get there. Okay.
Okay.
Good to know. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. And Joe, I'm going to mute you now, so if you need to get me, you can text me or call my cell or chat.
All right.
Joe, are you still seeing Peter's screen?
I am.
Okay, just wanted to check.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is John Nori, and I'll be your moderator for today. Next slide, please. Our topic is Fighting Against Fake, the case for news literacy as a vital 21st century skill set. Following are a few technical notes of information to assist you during the webinar. If you have any technical problems, you'll need the number at the top of your screen in red, the toll-free 855-352-9002, and you'll need the webinar ID number at the bottom of the screen, 201-574-803. That will be your lifeline to help if you're having any difficulties as we go on. Next slide, please. We hope that you'll be tweeting and spreading the word as we go through today. As you participate in the webinar, expand that conversation. Use hashtag NASSP webinar. We also are a presence on Facebook at facebook.com/principals. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available, as well as PowerPoint and certification documents that you might seek after the webinar is over. So without further ado, I'd like to say a few words about our presenter. Peter Adams is the News Literacy Project Senior Vice President of Education and is based in Chicago. Peter began his career in education as a classroom teacher in the New York City schools. He has also worked as a trainer with the New York City Training Fellows Program, a youth media after-school instructor in the Chicago Public Schools, and as an adjunct instructor at Roosevelt University and Chicago City College's Wilbur Wright campus. During the webinar, we invite you to send questions for Peter by typing them into the question box. I'll gather those, and at about 10 minutes before the end of the webinar, we'll start into a Q&A session, reading your questions to Peter and getting his responses. So without further ado, Peter, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thanks, John. So hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me. Just a word up front about this deck and this talk. I'm going to throw a lot of examples of news and information at you and make a number of points and move fairly quickly, but this is being recorded and we're sharing the slides with you, so don't worry about taking notes too quickly or getting access to slides later. You can find out more about the News Literacy Project on our website, which you can find at thenewsliteracyproject.org. We also have a newish e-learning platform. We launched it about 1.5 years ago called the Checkology Virtual Classroom. You can find that at checkology.org. That has 12 e-learning experiences that really cover the bases of news literacy. It's entirely free to register for and use one-to-many, and we are giving away student licenses to use it one-to-one for the rest of this school year. So that's a great resource to have some of your teachers possibly check out if you are interested in this content area or helping them integrate news literacy into their classroom practice. We also have a weekly email newsletter that comes out now every Monday, not Friday as it says there in the header, called The Sift. And this is really a rundown of the week in news literacy. Each example sort of includes ideas for teachers to incorporate that into the classroom in some kind of way, whether it's just to hold a discussion or organize an activity or a lesson around it. And you can find archives and sign up to receive that at thenewsliteracyproject.org/thesift. So that is a resource. And finally, from NLP, an online professional development series called Teaching News Literacy, which is going to be a 3-part series starting January 23rd, and we do one every 2 weeks and wrap up in February. And if you're interested, that is on Eventbrite. You can just search for Teaching News Literacy on Eventbrite and come up with that. I can also share the URL after the session with everyone. Okay, so I have three key takeaways for my talk today. First, students are facing by many magnitudes the largest and most complex information landscape in human history. The amount of information on the planet is doubling something like every 2 years right now. So there's much, much more information and many more kinds of information available than ever before. Also, opportunities for news literacy learning happen every day. It's just a matter of curating them and figuring out how to work them into classroom practice and really make them the heartbeat of instruction when possible. And third, not preparing students for the realities of the information landscape that they face, for me, is not an option. This is one big point I'd like to make. So we really cannot afford not to get them ready to be citizens in the 21st century, and that involves getting them ready to deal with the 21st century information landscape, things like this. So I don't know if any of you saw this circulating on social media. There were several iterations of it. This was the first person to post it to Twitter on November 28th. It looks to be a sign supporting Roy Moore of a Temple Baptist church. The assumption here is that this church is in Alabama. Lots of people really thought it was real, and they started to express some of their views based on this. This is why I detest religion, for example. So this, for this person, works as a piece of evidence signaling what religion is and does in the United States. Another person, sees this as evidence of a distortion of values, principles, and morality that's going on in the U.S. Other people want to take action. They think that this church should be made to pay taxes. Someone wants to file with the IRS. Other people are asking questions. Where is the City of Crosses? We'll come back to that. So here's a key question. What tools are available that help students verify the authenticity of images? Or what could teachers do with this viral rumor in the classroom? So one thing they could do is just do a simple Google search, like Temple Baptist Church, Alabama, and see if, in fact, there is a Temple Baptist Church in Alabama. There is. It's in Cullman, Alabama, and it's there. So that's one step. So you can verify it is. Students could actually call that church and ask them if they have a sign or if their sign that, or there are a number of other paths that they could take. If we look back here at the original post and then reflect back on this question that was posed, where is the City of Crosses? So if students use their observational skills and see that at the bottom of the church sign it says that the message of the cross to the City of the Crosses is sort of the sub-heading on that church sign, which should make them wonder where the City of Crosses is. So if they Googled Temple Baptist Church, City of Crosses, they would find out that there is a Temple Baptist Church in Las Cruces, New Mexico, which is the City of Crosses, which starts to raise questions. They can also look at the EXIF data in the image, so to try to read geotags and other data that's embedded in the image to see if they can tell where it's been taken. That's the metadata that this person is referring to. So I find out that the City of Crosses is in New Mexico. It's Las Cruces, New Mexico. Then I find out that there is a Temple Baptist Church there. And if I click into more information, I can see where it is and the address of that church. There's the phrase I saw on the sign, so that gives me a big clue. And then I can use Google Street View to actually go to that address and look at the sign. So you can see the sign there. And so basically just using Google Street View, I can confirm that that sign is not in Alabama, and that starts to raise real questions about its authenticity. The other thing students can do is to do a reverse image search. So if they are in Chrome, they can right-click the image and click Search Google for the image, and they can get results that with that image or similar images. And in this case, I can see images going all the way back to 2012 with this very same church sign, and a lot of mentions of something about God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And so then I can see that this message has also been on this church sign. And while I might think that this is just a very controversial church that tends to put up controversial church signs, I also notice that this comes from frabs.com, which is a memes and funny pics site. And if I look for frabs.com, I find out that there is an online Baptist church sign generator hosted there where I can make whatever message I want for this sign. So that is a strong clue that this isn't an authentic sign supporting Roy Moore. The other big clue is if we compare the two, they are exactly the same. So the cloud patterns are exactly the same. This is made by a church sign generator, a fake church sign generator, and there are quite a number of them that exist online. A great organization and exercise that students can use to work on digital forensics and observational skills come from First Draft News. They have something called their observation challenge, where they have to look at images and try to guess where they are. That's a great resource to pass along to students. They also have something called the geolocation challenge, which teaches you by doing how to use Google Street View to do what I just did with that church sign, if you're interested. And one of their partners actually sends out a daily quiz in the form of a tweet to see if students can get to the bottom of where that picture is, which is also a great activity for teachers to make available to students. So the Roy Moore story actually started really with the controversy anyway, started with this Washington Post piece on November 9, which was an investigative piece. And in the immediate aftermath, the same day, somebody tweeted that a family friend told his wife that a Washington Post reporter offered her money to accuse Roy Moore. So right away there was a viral rumor that Washington Post reporters were paying sources to say these things. But what we notice about that, well, first that raises the question why news organizations have strict policies that forbid this, and what does that have to do with credibility? So what would it mean if the Washington Post did, and how do we, what evidence is there that they did? The other thing we can take a look at is the actual tweet, and it is odd that the dollar sign is after the 1,000. Lots of people sort of raise questions about that, and raise questions about @umpire43 who tweeted this. So they started to look into who this person is running this Twitter account, and they noticed that he at different times had claimed to have won different numbers of the same military honors, so 2 Bronze Stars or 3 Bronze Stars or 4, and different numbers of Purple Hearts. Which could also raise questions that teachers and students could take up. Should Twitter verify people's identities, or is it better that they don't? In this case, you have somebody who's sort of posing as someone else on social. And what verification steps do you think get it right? So what is the right balance of verifying users and allowing people to have accounts where they don't want to be known? So people started drilling down on this particular Twitter account, and they found out that he had made a number of statements about his rank, about his experience that didn't match up, and these were kind of called out by folks who kind of monitor stolen valor situations. So teachers and students could dig into questions about social media companies being gatekeepers of what gets shared on their platforms. Some platforms like Snapchat actively act as gatekeepers for news and other information that's shared with all users. Other platforms like Twitter are a free-for-all. This picture on Twitter got a huge reaction, and everybody assumed that Trump was being impetuous, he was being rude, he was breaking protocol, and gave him no shortage of flack for this, including some journalists. And eventually, within the hour, and people obviously made inevitable comparisons to Obama, but within the hour, a video surfaced that actually showed the actions of Prime Minister Abe just before Trump. This was during his Asia trip recently. And he actually, it's not going to play the video for me here, I'm sorry. Abe actually does the same thing. He dumps his box first, which changes the meaning of that original image. The rumor kind of got started with a journalist named Justin Sink, and a lot of people then said, I desperately want to believe this. People sort of ran with it, and they leaned into it. So this is a good example of something called confirmation bias. When people want to believe something is true, when they're primed to believe something is true, they kind of lean into it. Their biases kind of take over, their emotions take over, and their rational minds take a back seat. And the metaphor for this is comparing it to an elephant and a rider. So we like to think that our riders are in control of our elephants, but in fact it works quite the other way around. Our elephants kind of go where they will, and our riders make up all the best reasons why that's the best way to go. So we like to think our rational minds are sort of in control, when in fact our emotions play a much stronger role than we think. And Francis Bacon wrote about this as well. Once we've adopted an opinion or a belief, and our rational minds actually draw on all things that it can access to support that position. So you can see this playing out on social media almost every day, especially now when we're experiencing such a partisan divide. And that was definitely the case with this picture on social media. So some questions that teachers could start with on that image: how did it go viral? Let's trace that back. Who was the first person to share it? If you shared it or reshared it on social media, what do you think you should do now that you know that it wasn't representative of what actually happened? And what should journalists who published this claim have done? What should the people who shared it on social have done? This is what one journalist did. Kind of tweeted the picture of his original post, which he had deleted, and then corrected himself, which isn't as good as never having done it, but it's better than just deleting the original post and not saying anything. This happened back in July when one video clip appeared to show the Polish First Lady snubbing Trump, and Newsweek actually ran with this, and it was a clip that they thought they had the whole clip, and there was more to it. She actually shakes Melania Trump's hand first and then turns to the president to shake his hand, but people were off and running. Again, they wanted to believe, some folks wanted to believe this was true, Chris Saliza at CNN among them, and they had it wrong. Here's the full clip. And she turns and shakes the president's hand. Brad Jaffe at NBC actually walked that back pretty quickly. So a big lesson for students here is to, when they first hear something, kind of wait and make sure it's not debunked in the short term. The same goes for a big breaking news event. You could also ask students, how can we help combat confirmation bias so we're all vulnerable to this habit of leaning into the information we want to be true, having our biases and emotions take over? How can we fight that and have students work on solutions around that question? I don't know if anyone in chat can chat if they know what this site is, what this is a screenshot of. This is an important place for students to be aware of, although it's not a safe place for students to go online, although some of our students are there, we know. Anybody know what site this comes from? And see if anybody can chat. I don't know if the chat box is open or...
It is open. I don't see anybody responding.
Got it. So this is a site called 4chan, which you might have heard referred to in news coverage of some of the recent mass shootings. And 4chan kind of swung into action, or tends to swing into action after major events. It happened after the driving the truck homicides attack in New York City recently, back in early November, and YouTube partisans sort of swung into the void immediately in the aftermath and started spouting rumors, and those being the only information available got picked up by people, got indexed by search engines, and rumors got started. The same thing happened after Devin Kelly's church shooting in Sutherland Springs, Texas. People used that gap between the event itself and the very first news reports. It's only about 15 or 20 minutes long, but they exploited that gap to push the idea that he was a member of Antifa. He is not, but that again got picked up on social media, and its presence on social media got picked up by search engines, and so it takes on a kind of truth. Here's a user on Twitter, Justin Hendricks, kind of pointing out that Google had picked up some of the misinformation and was actually featuring it under its popular on Twitter results. And so this sort of gives students a way to understand how misinformation can rush into the void in a breaking news event, and helps them understand how to process those events as consumers. Here's 4chan after Las Vegas. Immediately started looking for ways to twist the story and push false agendas, and say that it was a false flag event, to say that the shooter was Gary Danley when it wasn't, to say that he did this for ideological reasons as a progressive, and that sort of rumor got started very quickly as well, and it even made its way over to the Gateway Pundit, which has a very broad audience, but is a very hyper-partisan, highly unreliable news blog. Images get distorted and manipulated all the time. So this is Michael Bennett from the Seattle Seahawks, but he never danced with a burning flag. It really doesn't make sense. The sprinklers and everything would be going off inside. This was just a shot from the locker room, kind of a pep rally hyping up the team, and somebody photoshopped rather convincingly a burning flag in his hands. That went viral. Again, confirmation bias kicked in. People were outraged. People's biases kicked in when they saw images after Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria. So this image tends to circulate after most hurricanes now. That shark was photoshopped into that picture years ago, and it has gone viral repeatedly after major storms. Craig Silverman at BuzzFeed News actually tracked the guy who posted that down, and he said that, you know, if you were foolish enough to believe that, that's sort of on you, and he didn't regret it at all. You can do lots of things with manipulated images with students. For example, you can give them 4 images, 1 of which is real and 3 of which are false, and have kind of real or not races. So teach them how to do reverse image searches, and then let them in teams sort of race to figure out which of these 4 is authentic. Turns out that that is a real bridge in Japan. The other 3 are false. We also have a lesson in Checkology about viral rumors, sort of how they work, the major emotional triggers that they target. Most rumors try to evoke fear or anger or curiosity or hope, and that's how they sort of get around our rational minds. So there's a lesson helping students learn how viral rumors work and a little bit of basic rumor theory. This video of a face in the clouds is not Hurricane Irma. This was actually from New Brunswick in 2011. Again, it's recontextualized in the immediate aftermath of a storm to get traffic. These double tornadoes were not after Irma. They were from Elba, Italy in 2006. eBuzz was trying to build up a following because these accounts make money by mixing interesting posts like this, albeit dishonest posts, with promoted posts. So they take money to post things to their large following. So they share things like this simply to get followers so that they can make money by taking paid placements from people. Tom Hanks never wore that shirt. He wore this shirt. And he never wore this shirt. He never wore this shirt. He never wore this shirt. He never, all 4 of those rather are Photoshopped. Shirts are very easy to Photoshop. The first one I showed you went so viral that if you Google Tom Hanks shirt, you actually can see ways to buy the shirt that Tom Hanks never wore. So Google's algorithm is so familiar with the example of Tom Hanks wearing that shirt that it has indexed it and picked it up, which is interesting. LeBron James never wore this shirt. He wore that shirt, which is similar, but not quite the same. And again, you can just right-click out of Google Chrome and walk these kinds of things back. This can be a really powerful and empowering exercise for students. Putin never sat there, although it is a pretty convincing fake at first glance. Trump never tweeted this. I'll give you a moment. So it looks like an authentic tweet. It has his real Twitter handle. It has the blue verified check mark, but he never tweeted it. How do you make what appears to be a verified but fake Donald Trump tweet? You can use any number of fake Trump tweet generators. In fact, there are fake tweet generators that you can use to make a fake tweet from anyone's handle, and then it produces a JPEG, and you can share that picture on your social feed and say, look what this person tweeted, and then delete it. That's usually the way these things circulate. You can't click through to it because they deleted it. However, if they're politicians, there are some tools that automatically archive tweets so that you can actually check the official record against these fakes. But knowing that these kinds of tools exist to create misinformation is really, I think, important. I haven't quite figured out, and I would be open to taking ideas from you all about how we teach students about these tools without having them rush out and use them, which I haven't quite cracked that code yet. Also, in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey, a more pernicious rumor started. So this is a hashtag campaign that seemed to show evidence of unrest and of looting. It used the hashtag Harvey Loot Crew. It also sometimes pulled in the hashtag Black Lives Matter to kind of impugn that movement. But if you do a reverse image search on this image, you find out that's just taken from Etsy. So no one stole anyone's ashes in the aftermath of Harvey. That's kind of ludicrous. You can also see that the way these are written are trying to sort of flame racial tensions and invoke racism. Here's another one claiming to have stolen someone's dentures. This is a screen still from a YouTube video that you can find pretty easily, again, if you reverse image search and start to look for the origins instead of just believing what it is. This picture makes no sense. Harvey was in August in Texas. All of the guys in this photo have heavy coats on, and if you do a reverse image search, you find that this is all over the web, widely used on very racist websites, overtly white supremacist websites. So that sort of calls that one out. You can also look at the actual account, so have students drill down on individual accounts that are sharing things like this. You can see in this case that this account was brand new in August 2017 when Harvey happened. You can do a reverse image search on the actual profile picture and see if that's authentic. It is not. It is from all over the web again. So what the people who engaged in this hashtag and engaged in this activity did was just make new Twitter accounts, create false identities using pictures from all over the web, and use pictures from all over the web to manufacture what seemed to some people to be evidence of looting. And then those tweets got blogged about, they got shared, they generated outrage, they had an influence on what people thought was happening on the ground in Houston. This also happened in the wake of the death of Freddie Gray in Baltimore in 2015. A Baltimore loot crew hashtag emerged. This is not a Kentucky Fried Chicken in Baltimore. It is in Karachi, Pakistan. But again, it's very easy to copy a picture and repurpose it and drop it into a new context, and for people to just sort of run with that. They also repurposed images from a very sort of racist dog whistle Daily Mail story about some burglars and criminals, and use that for a profile picture. And again, that has a propagandistic effect. I mean, it inflames emotions and completely manufactures violence and looting that didn't happen in this instance. There was some unrest after Freddie Gray, but not as much as they were sort of showing, and they were actually manufacturing examples that never happened. So why does all this matter? I think that, to help students really understand that information is the basis for all of the decisions they make, and their decisions are the basis for their actions, is a really important lesson. It's very easy in this content-rich information landscape to think that, oh, well, I don't know if it's true or not, but I'm going to share it, or, oh, I don't know, I guess it doesn't matter if that's an accurate picture or not. It doesn't matter if LeBron James wore that shirt, but it actually does matter, because it's the way that we know anything, and it also is the way that we make decisions about our own lives, about what we study, about the jobs we take, and the actions we take, about what social issues matter, about how we vote. So everything sort of starts with information. And the other big lesson here, I think, for educators is that all issues and events throw off misinformation, especially controversial ones. But I think rather than get down about that as educators, we have to see those as opportunities for engagement, for opportunities for news literacy learning, kind of along the lines that I've showed you. Another key concept that students can look into using news literacy is evidence. Does this picture, which is authentic, actually back up the claim that accompanies it? Is that evidence? Do these pictures back up the claim that people on the left are hypocritical when it comes to the environment? You can talk about that. You can actually reverse image search and try to figure out the backstory on those pictures. Another key concept I think is important to teach students about is satire. There are a variety of kinds of satire. I think of satire as residing on a kind of spectrum, from obvious satire to thinly disguised satire to disingenuous satire, which we'll talk about in a minute. This is a piece of satire from the Huffington Post, and you can look with students and work through how this is labeled. So it's in the entertainment section of the Huffington Post. If you look at the author's byline, under his byline, you can see that he's a founding contributor of something called the Political Garbage Chute. That gives you a clue. He's the holder of 0 world records. That gives you a clue. But those are all the labels that you have. And so is that enough? And why is that description of the author in gray? Is it easy to miss? So those are some of the kinds of questions that you can ask with students. And if you feel like, especially in today's era of mistaken satire and disingenuous satire, if that's not well enough labeled, students should be tweeting at the Huffington Post and saying, hey, we think you need a stronger label to let users know when they're seeing a piece of satire so that they don't actually think that Betsy DeVos ordered the flattening of all school globes. Andy Borowitz, as well known as he is, and a very well-known satirist for The New Yorker, his headlines can be mistaken for truth, even though the person tweeting about this here and here seem to realize that this is satire. If you look at the headline and the preview text on Twitter, there's nothing in that that says satire. You just see NewYorker.com, so it's very easy for consumers to get confused. If you share a piece of from Andy Borowitz on Facebook now, it pulls in this header. So I would say that this is done right. This is labeling done well, very prominently in red, not the news. That's very clear, and we should look for news organizations to do more of that. We should look for media companies to do more of that. And when we don't see it, to talk back, to say, hey, I'm concerned that this could be misunderstood, that this could create even more confusion than we already have. Some people even mistake The Onion for actual headlines, although they're a very well-known satirical brand. The Babylon Bee, less so. This went viral in the aftermath of Harvey. And I saw lots of folks on Facebook, including the person who shared this here, saying that, you know, this is disgusting. This is, and not understanding that this was satire. Again, I think labeling is really important. Now, the first person to comment on this actually corrected them and helped them understand. Other satire accounts and satirical pieces are less well labeled. So, @FutureCNN is a satirical Twitter handle that uses CNN's actual logo but modifies it to seem like it's melting in a kind of, you know, dystopian hellscape. It does label itself as a parody account, as a satire account. And what they do is take actual screenshots of CNN and edit the lower third or edit the chyron at the bottom of the screen. So these are real screenshots from CNN, but they've changed the words by digitally manipulating them to make a satirical or a point, a parodic point. But I worry about the potential for these screenshots to get loose in the information landscape and to generate disinformation or misinformation or confusion. Accounts like this are more overtly satirical, but you can sort of work with students and think, how would we arrange these examples on a spectrum of satire, and which ones are labeled responsibly, which ones are published responsibly in a way that's not going to generate confusion, and which ones are not. The Chicago Tribune published a piece of satire that was really not well labeled, and some people believed was an actual story. And then, of course, there's disingenuous satire, what is commonly called fake news, which is sometimes published on an imposter news website like abcnews.com.co, which is finally down. It's finally offline. But that caused a ton of confusion for a long time and was shared by influencers. The pieces were shared by people with large followings, and those are entirely manufactured. But you could debate, you know, what's really the difference between a piece of satire that's not well labeled and a piece of disingenuous satire or fake news that is entirely fabricated to get clicks and make dollars. This is the author of that piece in the Chicago Tribune. America's Last Line of Defense is another big fake news site, totally disingenuous satire, although it does give you some clues. Again, if you do a critical analysis of the page, you'll notice that this was filed under Freedom. It was written by written by Freedom, rather, filed under Potatoes as the section site. So if you interrogate these kinds of things, they tend to give themselves away. Of course, if you read the About section, it will also give itself away. But a lot of disingenuous satire or fake news isn't, is far from innocent. Here is a rumor that Black Lives Matter protesters were blocking aid from reaching people in Houston after Harvey. That's actually a picture from Boston. So again, you see this tactic of generating outrage and exploiting people's passions for clicks and dollars at the expense of a real movement and misrepresenting it. The irony here is that Black Lives Matter was involved in delivering aid to victims of Harvey, so it was the exact opposite of what was actually happening. There are entire networks of these fake news accounts. There's someone named Christopher Blair who runs a number of them, and they're very successful. They make a lot of money from ad views, which is a big problem. So I tend to think of it as counterfeit news is a term that I prefer now that the term has kind of been weaponized and used to apply to everything. And I think helping students think of imposter news sites is also useful. But I really resist the idea that all misinformation is somehow fake news. So I see fake news or disingenuous satire or counterfeit news as a very specific strategy. And that misinformation that's not presented as news is actually something else. It's a meme, it's a piece of propaganda, it's a hoax. And conflating those kinds of things with fake news actually obscures and ends inquiry. It shuts people down from sort of looking into and walking those stories back as we kind of have here in some of these examples. And again, they'll give themselves away if you interrogate them enough and learn how to read them. So I think that's a very important skill for students to have. And this is sort of what the about section of the last line of defense says. PUNDITFACT from PolitiFact has a list of fake news websites that it keeps up and then sort of helps you understand what type they are. It's a fairly long list. As of they update it every couple months. These websites come up and go down very quickly. They're there to make money, and once they get sniffed out or blocked from a social network or downgraded in Google's algorithm, they just get a new URL. So students have to be very careful about the source that they're looking at. Prank news is a new trend as well. This is kind of user-generated fake news. So things like this. Sharks did not get picked up by Hurricane Irma. But this was created on a fake news, prank news generator called Break Your Own News, where you basically write a headline, write a lower third, and pick an image to go into that and then share it on social media and see how many of your friends you can fool. May seem like fun, but I always encourage educators to dissuade students from doing this, and please don't do it as a lesson. I've heard teachers say, I have students make rumors and fake information or misinformation as an exercise to teach them about it. I think that sends the exact wrong message. Here's another one that was made by users. Here's another prank news generator. And again, I urge everyone not to do this. Here's another one. Here's another one. They're all over. So it's very easy to make misinformation. Here's an app called Twerker that lets you actually take a headline, in this case from the Washington Post, and change it. And then do a screen capture and share that to social media. So that can create all kinds of confusion because now you're publishing false claims under the banner or brand of a trusted news source for many folks. And it's just really a bad idea to have students use this. Even if they're just trying to prank their friends or own their friends, they're actually exploiting their friends and spreading misinformation in the meantime. Those clicks, by the way, are turned into dollars. So when people click on those and they get fooled by them, they're driven to a web page, and that's the whole point. They're served an ad along with a message that says you got fooled by your friend, but what they really got fooled by is the person who made that generator and is making money on that traffic. Another key concept is disinformation. So disinformation is misinformation that is not accidental or unintentional. It's actually intended to misinform. The biggest example we have of this recently, obviously, is the Russian disinformation campaign that spread on Facebook during the campaign. And they really sought to exploit partisan passions on both sides. So they posted things. These are actual pieces that have been verified to come from Russian state-sponsored disinformation houses or organizations in Russia. The biggest one is the Internet Research Agency. And they just really sought to deepen divisions, to heighten tensions. They even organized protests on the ground from abroad that people actually showed up to, so that they didn't just limit it to misinformation or disinformation. They got people in action. And I think that just punctuates that sequence again, that information is the basis for the decisions we make. and our decisions are the basis for our actions. So they deepened and fabricated controversies and then got people to turn out based on the information that they were providing, which was entirely intended to inflame people's passions. I think a great exercise students can do is to not stop at the surface of a piece of media, but go down the rabbit hole. Ask Facebook, for example, why am I seeing this ad, or reporting certain kinds of ads or users and going through those processes. Students can also look into creating an ad. So what Russian operatives did here is just create organization pages on Facebook, which anyone is free to do, and then they just purchased ads using the platform, which anyone is free to do. And it's very efficient, and that's what makes Facebook such a powerful and successful company. They can help you target a very specific audience. And if students created, say, a PSA, a positive message, and they wanted to make a $5 media buy on Facebook as a class, they could do that. And that's such a powerful learning experience. That is what I would love to see students actually doing, instead of creating misinformation, understanding how easy it is to target audiences with a positive message, something that they've made. That can be a great learning experience. So I want to touch on where we're sort of heading in terms of misinformation, what some of the trends on the horizon are, and then run through some tools and resources. And then there will be more resources and more slides at the end of the deck that you get after this session that we won't get to, but I wanted to make sure to share those with you as well. So one big difference in the email leaks from the Podesta leaks that affected Clinton's campaign and the leaks around Emmanuel Macron in France is that the Macron leaks involved authentic emails mixed with fake emails, whereas the Podesta emails were all authentic. So mixing fake and authentic is a trend that we're seeing lots of. Recently, Russian operatives copied the Guardian's website. So they actually copied every page of the Guardian by copying the source code, and then they rehosted the Guardian at this URL, which, if you look closely, is almost at the Guardian's real URL, but the I doesn't have a dot above it. It's actually a Turkish character, and they've registered that domain, and they drove people to that site, and then they placed fake articles on that sort of fake copy of the Guardian website in and amongst actual Guardian articles. That's another tactic that we see. The tools of misinformation are also getting better. This is a video that shows how false video or fake video can be manufactured. I'm going to turn my speakers up and try to get sound for you all so you can just sort of get a sense.
It's been less than a week since the deadliest mass shooting in American history.
Our method produces the following output.
It's been less than a week since the deadliest mass shooting in American history. And foremost in all of our minds has been the loss and the grief felt by the people of Orlando.
Here's the ground truth video of Obama saying the same words.
Especially our friends who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. I visited with the families of many of the victims on Thursday, and one thing I told them is that they're not alone. The American people and people all over the world are standing with them, and we always will.
So basically, the video on the left that you were seeing is the authentic video. The video on the right was was an algorithm that was creating a video image of Obama to match the sound. So that's how good these algorithms are. Here's another example of this with an algorithm matching an actor's face movements and creating the same movements using a library of footage of George W. Bush.
A novel real-time facial reenactment method that works with any commodity webcam. Since our method only uses RGB data for both the source and target actor, we present a novel real-time facial reenactment method that works with...
So you get a sense. I want to go ahead and move on, but the tools of misinformation, here's another example of this, are getting better. So these aren't actual faces of people. These are algorithmically generated pictures. These are actually just pixel patterns. This is a computer's guess at what would fool people into thinking these are real people. And this is sort of the process they went through. Two algorithms sort of pit off. One is trying to become an expert at detecting fakes, and one is trying to become an expert at creating fakes. And they run through many thousands of examples in a minute, and are constantly morphing until it learns what can fool the other one and getting better and better at it. This was research that was done by computer chip maker NVIDIA. So these are all fake people. This is an algorithm guessing at what would fool you into thinking that this is a real image of a person. There are some legitimate use cases of this technology. You can create people for catalogs, and you don't have to pay models, and you don't have to do photo shoots. They are working on creating fake furniture for the same purpose, but you can imagine the sort of uses to which that will be put. So I'm going to just skip through some of these slides here and get to some of the resources that we offer, and I just want to touch on Checkology and sort of give you a sense of what it is and what it looks like. So again, as I mentioned, it's an e-learning hub. It lives at checkology.org. It's free to register for, free to use, and it sort of covers the basis of news literacy, so helping students gain the foundational concepts and skills to navigate the information landscape and to understand how to evaluate the credibility of information. So most of these lessons are hosted by a subject matter expert. So we have a lesson called Info Zones in our first module that helps students understand what they're looking at and categorize information by primary purpose. And that one is hosted by Tracy Potts of NBC News Channel. And by the end, students are sort of categorizing examples by info zones. So there are always authentic collections of information that they are working through as they practice for mastery. Here's another example of something that they would zone as raw information and really help them sort of understand that as a first step. We teach students about news judgment, about how news organizations decide what to cover and what to feature, which is a necessary but subjective process. And then we help transition them into a lesson where they actually, here's a not very newsworthy piece, for example. We transition them into a lesson where they take on the role of an editor at a digital first news organization, and they have to evaluate 20 stories and decide which 5 make their front page, and then the tool builds their front page for them, and then they justify their choices and explain why they picked what they picked. We do have a whole module on exercising civic freedom, so a lesson about the First Amendment with First Amendment expert Sam Chaltain, and that walks students through some landmark First Amendment decisions, many of them having to do with student speech. We get a lot of great feedback on that lesson. We have a lesson about the watchdog role of the press. We have a lesson about the watchdog role that citizens can play. That's another case study driven lesson hosted by Tamara Griffin of BuzzFeed News. We have a lesson about branded content. We have lessons about algorithms and personalization and bias. So I would encourage you to sort of check Checkology out. And I already mentioned some of the resources from First Draft News, their observation challenge, their geolocation challenge, both really great tools as well. And other resources, bot analyzing accounts, helping students understand what bots are and what some of the patterns are. There are tools that you can look up the tweets of politicians. I mentioned that. ProPublica has a tool called PolitWhoops. That's a great tool to share with your social studies and civics teachers. So I want to pause here because I know we're coming up on Q&A. I can keep talking about tools if there aren't questions, but John, why don't we maybe give folks a chance to pose some questions, because they can look at these resources in the slides after the session on their own.
Okay, the only questions that I have so far are 3 that you're familiar with. So if you want to keep on, you can certainly do that. It's your call. You want to go into those questions that we looked at before?
I'm happy to if you'd like to work through those now, and then if we have time, I can. Yep.
Okay. The first one is, what concepts and skills do students need to successfully navigate today's information landscape?
Well, I mean, a lot, and they're actually shifting. But I think some core concepts and skills really serve them well. So one thing that we really rely on are the standards of quality journalism and helping students understand what those standards are. I think a lot of news organizations are realizing now that they didn't do a good job of explaining how they do the work they do or why they do the work they do or what their standards are, and that need is becoming clear now. I think understanding what the standards of quality journalism are for students is a really powerful way to give them a tool set to use as consumers to evaluate the credibility of information. So to understand what good sourcing looks like, for example, understand what they can believe or when they should maybe hold off and wait for confirmation. So, you know, the recent gaffes by ABC News and then CNN had to do with sourcing. They were trying to get information about documents that they didn't have or about sessions that they couldn't be in because they were closed-door sessions. And I think if students had an understanding of sourcing and good sourcing, they would know sort of when they can believe something and when they should hold off for more information.
Thank you. The next question is, how can teachers integrate news literacy learning into their classrooms?
That's a good question. There are lots of ways, obviously, and that's one reason that we started the SIFT, which is that weekly email newsletter that comes out on Monday that is a review of everything that happened last week that we think is really notable for and well positioned to use with students. So that's one way, is to sort of keep your eye on what happens. I think that teaching news literacy with really timely examples, even if they're just bell ringers, is a really engaging way for students to start to learn some of these skills. And then obviously, you know, drawing on some of the resources that I shared can be important. It is, you know, I will say a very confusing and fast-moving information landscape. So part of our goal as an organization is to help give teachers a fighting chance to keep up with it and to give them some strategies for bringing it into their classroom in a timely way.
I have a question about the SIFT. Could you say more about that and how participants can subscribe to that and have their teachers subscribe to that, please?
Yeah, it is. You can actually check out archives of it. Let me just scroll back to my slide about it. You can go to the newsliteracyproject.org/the SIFT. We used to put it out on Friday. We changed it to Mondays. That's why the header there says Friday. And it gives you, you know, it runs through 4 or 5 things that happened the week before, like the NVIDIA announcement that they had released these pictures that weren't actual people, and how you could maybe use that in the classroom. So we give you a quick idea of what it is, what happened, what the example is, and then ideas for how to lead discussions around it, how to lead students through a path of inquiry that might end in some kind of student project, some kind of civic action.
Thank you. This has been a information-packed session and one of the best webinars I've moderated for a long time. The final question that I have in front of me is, what impact does news literacy have on civic literacy and engagement and on student voice and empowerment?
Right. Yeah, I really see news literacy as a necessary foundation for civic literacy and civic empowerment. So if you're believing things that aren't true, if you're incorporating misinformation or disinformation or propaganda into your worldview, you're also basing your political beliefs on faulty information, which makes your political actions less authentic and less meaningful. So I really think that when you empower students to evaluate credibility, to catch misinformation that's trying to manipulate their emotions and take advantage of them and exploit them, you are really empowering them as civic actors. So I think there's an absolute marriage there between news and information literacy and civic literacy and civic empowerment and civic engagement.
Thank you. Peter, you had said something early on about a resources section in your PowerPoint deck. Would you take a moment to take us there and
Sure.
Just tell people about that?
Yep, so I kind of showed off some of the lessons that Checkology offers. I should say that Checkology also offers teachers a lightweight LMS or learning management system functionality where they can evaluate the student work and they can send work back for another try. Students earn points and badges, so it really has a lot of robust functionality, and encourage you to check it out, especially for the rest of this year while the premium version of that platform is free. The student seats, student licenses are free. You can use it one-to-one. So I talked about PolitWhoops, I think, last from ProPublica. This lets you catch some of those fake tweets from politicians. If somebody makes a fake tweet and they say that, Trump tweeted this, but he deleted it, you can actually go check the archived version of Trump's Twitter feed, which PolitWhoops automatically captures. Students can look up domain registrations. This is one example. Whois.net lets you try to start to look up who owns a particular site. Sometimes people try to hide their identities and stay anonymous, and there are third parties that can kind of intercede and they can hide behind them. But even that, I think, rather than a dead end, is an invitation for further inquiry. So should that be legal? Should we be able to see who has registered a website or who is behind a certain URL? Wolfram Alpha is a really powerful tool. You can, among other things, look up what the weather was in a certain location on a certain date, which helps you sort of catch fake images or fake videos that claim to be from a given place, but you can't verify it. You can just check the weather as a first step. So if it's rainy in the video and it's sunny in the record of Wolfram Alpha, you know that that's a big red flag and you need to look further. EXIF data readers can read data that's embedded in images, like the geolocation, the GPS tag that some images bear. Other great resources, I think, for social studies and civics teachers in particular, Blue Feed, Red Feed by the Wall Street Journal. They kind of curate side-by-side social media feeds on the topics you see below. So you can click on guns and see a real-time curated feed, one on the left, one on the right. They took two accounts and followed highly partisan sources of news and information on the left and did the same on the right. And you can see those feeds in real time and kind of compare the way things get messaged. And then maybe compare that to something that's that is a straight news report from a mainstream publication and see the differences, you know, between something that where people have aspired to be neutral as opposed to have aspired to sort of rally their ideological bases. The Pew Research Center has done some research that I think draws our political moment into focus, that we really are drifting further apart. We're getting more and more partisan, and the middle ground of commonly held facts in our national discussion, the national conversation, is really in jeopardy. So I think it sort of establishes the stakes to doing these things, and that was part of the rationale behind Red Feed, Blue Feed. So here's a shot of the guns feed that I took, some weeks ago, but I would encourage everybody to check that tool out. It's really, really powerful and great. Students can also do things like ask Facebook for a copy of their own data profile. So if you are teaching students about data and privacy, they can go on Facebook and ask Facebook, hey, what do you know about me? There are laws that give you that right. They can also ask for their data profile from a major data broker like Axiom to say, what do you know about me? Or their parents can request their profile, and then have conversations about the collection of data. And it kind of gives them a different way to view their experiences on Facebook and social media, because they generate a lot of data that's then very useful for those platforms to use to target advertising at them. And I think students really need to know that. There are a few more. I mean, the TV News Archive is a project of the Internet Archive, which has some very great tools. Hypothesis is a web annotation tool that is about a year old. It lets you create an account and then annotate any web page. It's almost like a transparency that rides over your web experience. And you can follow other people on Hypothesis. So if all of us created Hypothesis accounts, I could just turn your annotations on, and when I hit a website that you've annotated, I can see those annotations. So I think it's a wonderful tool for teachers to use for class annotations of information, students working in groups to fact check things, and so on. Let's skip a few here. I think that the museum's collection of front pages is a really great tool as well. You can search through hundreds of newspapers from around the world and look at their front pages on a given day. That gives you a way to sort of think about news judgment, or think about the differences between what runs as a lead story in a local paper in a smaller town versus a large city that's maybe a national paper, and have some of those discussions as well. So, and then there's some bonus slides here, which I won't get into, but they kind of run through, when I said in answer to your question, John, that the standards of quality journalism are really powerful concepts for students. This walks you through what 7 major standards are and kind of why they matter. So, these slides that everyone will get is a good place to go if you want to learn more about those standards. And then there's a lesson on Checkology as well that teaches about the standards of quality journalism.
Thank you, Peter. I want to again repeat, this has been one of the most action-packed and information-packed webinars we've done recently. Thank you very much for your time today. Also like to take the opportunity to invite our participants to the NASSP conference, which will happen, the 2018 conference will happen July 11th through 13th in Chicago, Illinois. If you have never been to a conference, it's a really good opportunity to come and interact with your colleagues and learn more about resources like our webinars and other information that's available at that conference. Again, www.principalsconference.org is where you go to register and get all the details about the conference. Peter, thank you again. Appreciate your being with us, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in today.
Thank you, John.